I was standing in the bed of my pickup truck, one hand shielding my eyes from the blazing Arizona sun, when I saw her marching across the desert scrub toward my property like she owned the entire state. I had just finished marking out the foundation for my dream workshop, a sprawling 2,400 square foot metal building where I planned to restore classic cars and finally have room to breathe after 20 years of cramped garage spaces in Phoenix. The woman was wearing a beige pantsuit despite the 90-degree heat, her blonde hair teased into that aggressive suburban style that screamed manager requests and complaint letters. She was clutching a folder against her chest like it contained nuclear launch codes, and her sensible heels were kicking up dust with every determined step across my 5 acres of raw land. "Excuse me," she called out when she was still 50 yards away. "You need to stop what you're doing immediately." I hopped down from the truck bed, wiping sweat from my forehead with my work glove. My name is Vance, and I'd spent the last 3 months preparing for this moment. After selling my cramped house in Scottsdale and cashing out most of my savings, I'd purchased this beautiful plot of land outside Wickenburg, Arizona. The property was everything I'd dreamed of, completely isolated, surrounded by sagebrush and stunning mountain views, with the nearest neighbor a good quarter-mile away. I'd done my research, checked with the county, pulled all the proper permits, and hired a reputable contractor. Everything was legal and above board. "Can I help you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice friendly despite the irritation already building in my chest. She stopped about 10 feet away, breathing heavily from her trek across the uneven ground. Up close, I could see she was probably in her mid-50s, with the kind of perpetually pinched expression that suggested she'd spent decades perfecting her disapproval. "I'm Brenda Morrison, president of the Copper Ridge Estates Homeowners Association," she announced, like I should immediately fall to my knees in deference. "And you are in direct violation of our HOA bylaws by attempting to construct that monstrosity without proper approval from the Architectural Review Committee." I blinked at her, genuinely confused. "I'm sorry, what? I'm not part of any HOA. This property isn't in a development." Brenda's lips pressed into a thin line. "Copper Ridge Estates encompasses all residential properties within our designated boundaries. According to our bylaws, any structure over 400 square feet requires architectural review and approval. Additionally, metal buildings are explicitly prohibited due to aesthetic concerns." I laughed. I couldn't help it. The absurdity of the situation was too much. "Madam, I appreciate you coming all the way out here, but I'm not part of your HOA. I checked the property records before I bought this land. There are no HOA covenants, conditions, or restrictions attached to my deed." She opened her folder with a sharp snap. "I have the boundaries right here. Copper Ridge Estates extends from Highway 60 north to County Road 17, and from my property is a half-mile south of Highway 60, I interrupted. "I'm nowhere near your development." Brenda's face was reddening now, whether from the heat or frustration I couldn't tell. "Mr. Vance, I presume?" "Yes. I pulled your property information from the county records. You may think you're outside our boundaries, but our HOA has been in discussions about expanding our jurisdiction to include outlying properties that affect the overall aesthetic and property values of our community." "Discussions don't mean anything legally," I said, my patience wearing thin. "You can't just decide to expand your HOA boundaries to include land you don't have any legal claim to. That's not how property law works." "We'll see about that," she said, her voice taking on a threatening tone. "I'm formally notifying you that any construction on this property will result in legal action from the Copper Ridge Estates HOA, We have significant resources and an excellent attorney on retainer." I took a deep breath, reminding myself that losing my temper wouldn't help anything. "Miss Morrison, I've got permits from Maricopa County. I've got approval from the zoning board. I've got a contractor scheduled to start pouring foundation next week. Everything I'm doing is completely legal and within my rights as a property owner. Your HOA has absolutely no jurisdiction here." "We'll see," she repeated, then turned and started marching back toward the dirt road where I could now see a pristine white Lexus SUV parked. "You'll be hearing from our attorney." I watched her go, shaking my head in disbelief. I'd heard horror stories about HOAs before, but I'd specifically bought property outside any development to avoid exactly this kind of nonsense. Surely this was just some busybody overstepping her authority. And once I ignored her, she'd realize she had no legal ground to stand on and leave me alone. I was wrong. 3 days later, a certified letter arrived at my temporary rental in Wickenburg. Inside was a cease and desist order from Patterson and Associates, attorneys at law, demanding I immediately halt all construction activities on my property and submit detailed architectural plans to the Copper Ridge Estates Architectural Review Committee within 14 days. Failure to comply, the letter threatened, would result in legal action including injunctive relief and financial penalties. I drove straight to a lawyer's office in Phoenix. Janet Reynolds was a real estate attorney who'd been recommended by my contractor, a no-nonsense woman in her 40s who'd spent 20 years dealing with Arizona property disputes. "This is ridiculous," she said after reading through the letter. "You have your title insurance information." I handed over the paperwork. Janet spent the next 30 minutes reviewing my property documents, pulling up county records on her computer, and making notes on a legal pad. "Okay, here's the situation," she finally said. "Your property is absolutely not part of the Copper Ridge Estates HOA. Their recorded boundaries are clearly defined in the original development documents from 2003, and your parcel is 2,640 feet outside their southern boundary. That's exactly half a mile, just like you said." "So I can ignore this?" I asked hopefully. "Not exactly," Janet said, frowning. "The problem is that they've filed a lawsuit. Even though they have no legal basis, you still have to respond. If you don't, they could potentially get a default judgment." "You're kidding." "I'm not. The legal system doesn't care if someone's claim is baseless. They filed in court, so now we have to respond in court. I'll draft an answer and file a motion to dismiss, which any reasonable judge will grant immediately, but it's going to cost you money and time." The retainer was $3,500. I wrote the check, feeling my blood pressure rising with every digit. Over the next 2 weeks, I tried to continue with my building plans, but everything was complicated by the pending lawsuit. My contractor, a good guy named Mike Torres who'd been building in Arizona for 30 years, was getting nervous. "Look, Lucas, I believe you that you're in the right," he said when we met at the property. "But I can't start work until this is resolved. If there's an injunction and we pour foundation, I could lose my license." "There's not going to be an injunction," I insisted. "They have no case." "Probably not, but my insurance company is already sending me emails. They got wind of the lawsuit somehow. Until a judge dismisses this thing, my hands are tied. I'm sorry, man." I understood, but it didn't make me any less furious. Brenda Morrison and her HOA were successfully preventing me from building on my own property, despite having absolutely no legal authority to do so, simply by abusing the court system. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks out, which meant 6 weeks of delays, 6 weeks of paying rent on my temporary place, 6 weeks of my dream project sitting in limbo. I'd already had to take unpaid leave from my job as a mechanical engineer to oversee the construction, and now that time was just evaporating. But Brenda wasn't done. 2 weeks after the first letter, I got another one. This time, the HOA was demanding I remove the surveyor stakes marking my foundation boundaries, claiming they were unsightly and violated community standards. They also objected to my pickup truck being parked on the property, saying that vehicles must be garaged when not in use. "They're completely insane," I told Janet over the phone. "They're harassing you," she agreed, "which is actually good for us. Keep every letter, every email, every piece of communication. We're going to need it." I started documenting everything. I set up a trail camera pointed at the road to record anyone who came onto my property. I created a folder with every piece of paper the HOA sent me. I took photos of my surveyor stakes, my truck, my property boundaries, everything. It was a good thing I did, because the harassment escalated quickly. I was at the property one morning, meeting with an electrician to discuss the power hookup, when a Maricopa County Code Enforcement truck pulled up. A tired-looking inspector in his 50s climbed out, carrying a clipboard. "Lucas Vance," he asked. "That's me. I'm Dan Kowalski, County Code Enforcement. I got a complaint that you've got unpermitted structures on this property." I felt my jaw clench. "I don't have any structures. I've got surveyor stakes marking where a structure will eventually go once I'm allowed to build it." Dan looked around the empty property, at the surveyor stakes, and the neat piles of building materials I'd already purchased. "Mind if I take a look around?" "Go ahead." He spent 10 minutes walking the property line, checking the stakes, looking at my material piles. Finally, he came back, shaking his head. "Yeah, there's nothing here that requires a permit. Who called this in?" I'm going to guess Brenda Morrison from the Copper Ridge Estates HOA. Dan's expression immediately shifted to one of weary recognition. "Ah, hell, Brenda. Yeah, she calls in probably 3 complaints a week. Most of them are bogus. Listen, you're all clear here. I'll note that in my report. Sorry to waste your time." "Not your fault," I said. "Just doing your job." But the complaints kept coming. Over the next month, I had visits from code enforcement 3 more times, the fire marshal once, and even a deputy sheriff responding to a report of suspicious activity on my property. The suspicious activity turned out to be me, sitting in a lawn chair, eating a sandwich and watching the sunset over my own land. Every single complaint came back to Brenda Morrison and the Copper Ridge Estates HOA. The court hearing finally arrived in late April. I wore my best suit and met Janet at the Maricopa County Superior Court in Phoenix. We were there 30 minutes early, but Brenda was already in the hallway, flanked by a lawyer in an expensive suit, and 2 other women who I guessed were also HOA board members. "Mr. Vance," Brenda said coldly as we passed. "Ready to discuss compliance. Ready to have your frivolous lawsuit thrown out," I replied. Inside the courtroom, I sat behind Janet at the defendant's table while the HOA's lawyer, a slick guy named Richard Patterson, sat with Brenda at the plaintiff's table. The judge, a stern-looking woman named Judge Patricia Chen, took the bench right at 9 a.m. "This is case number CV 2026-003847, Copper Ridge Estates Homeowners Association versus Lucas Vance," the clerk announced. "Motion to dismiss filed by defendant." Janet stood up. "Your Honor, this is a straightforward property boundary issue. The plaintiff's HOA has clearly recorded boundaries that do not include my client's property. We've submitted survey documents, title records, and the original HOA plat map, all of which conclusively prove that Mr. Vance's property is outside the HOA's jurisdiction. This lawsuit has no legal basis and should be dismissed immediately. Judge Chen looked at Patterson. Counsel, Patterson stood, smoothing his tie. Your Honor, while the strict technical boundaries of the original HOA plat may not include Mr. Vance's property, we believe that, as an adjacent property owner, his construction activities directly impact the property values and aesthetic integrity of our community. We're asking the court to recognize an expanded sphere of interest that counsel, Judge Chen interrupted. Does the HOA's governing documents include any provision for this expanded sphere of interest? Not explicitly, Your Honor, and has the HOA gone through any legal process to expand its boundaries to include Mr. Vance's property? We've begun preliminary discussions about. That's a no. Judge Chen flipped through the documents in front of her. I've reviewed the submitted materials, and I'm frankly astounded this case made it to my courtroom. The defendant's property is clearly outside the HOA's boundaries. There is no legal basis for the HOA to exercise any authority over this property. Motion to dismiss is granted. I felt a surge of relief wash over me. Furthermore, Judge Chen continued, and her voice took on a sharp edge, I'm concerned about what appears to be a pattern of harassment. Mr. Patterson, is your client aware that filing frivolous lawsuits and making false reports to government agencies constitutes abuse of process? Patterson shifted uncomfortably. Your Honor, my client firmly believes, your client's beliefs don't supersede property law. Miss Morrison, Judge Chen looked directly at Brenda. I'm ordering you and your HOA to cease all contact with Mr. Vance regarding this property. No letters, no complaints to county offices, no harassment of any kind. If I see this case in my courtroom again, I'll start considering sanctions. Do you understand? Brenda's face was bright red. Your Honor, you don't understand what his construction will do to our property values. What I understand is property law, Miss Morrison. What you're going to understand is that you have no authority over property you don't have jurisdiction over. We're done here. Judge Chen banged her gavel. I could have floated out of that courtroom. Janet was grinning as we walked into the hallway. That went even better than I expected, she said. Judge Chen basically handed you a restraining order without you having to file for one. So it's over. I asked. It should be. If they contact you again, we file for sanctions and they'll be looking at serious penalties. Enjoy building your workshop. I shook her hand, paid her final bill, and drove back to Wickenburg feeling like the weight of the world had been lifted off my shoulders. I called Mike Torres from the road. We're clear, I told him. Judge threw out the whole case. When can you start? I'll have my crew out there Monday morning, Mike said. Let's get this thing built. That weekend was one of the best of my life. I drove out to the property both days, just walking the land, visualizing the finished workshop, planning where I'd put my tool benches and my lift. I'd already bought a 1967 Mustang Fastback that needed a complete restoration. It was sitting in a storage unit in Phoenix, waiting for me to have proper space to work on it. Monday morning, I was at the property at 6 a.m., watching the sunrise and waiting for Mike's crew. They showed up at 7:30, 3 trucks full of equipment and materials. By noon, they had the foundation forms set up and were ready to pour concrete. I was standing there watching them work, drinking a bottle of water, when I heard the sound of another vehicle approaching. My stomach sank even before I turned around and saw Brenda Morrison's white Lexus SUV bouncing down the dirt road. She got out of the car with another woman, this one probably in her early 60s with short gray hair and an expensive-looking blazer. Mr. Vance, Brenda called out. We need to speak with you. I walked over to meet them at the property line, pulling out my phone and starting a video recording. Miss Morrison, the judge ordered you to cease all contact with me. This is Helen Davenport, our HOA's vice president, Brenda said, ignoring my statement. We've discussed the situation with our board, and we're prepared to offer you a compromise. I don't need a compromise. I have a court order saying you have no authority here. Helen stepped forward, putting on what she probably thought was a friendly smile. Mr. Vance, please. We're trying to be reasonable. We understand the judge ruled in your favor regarding jurisdiction, but surely you can appreciate our concerns. That metal building you're planning is going to be an eyesore. It's going to be on my property, half a mile from your development. But visible from several of our homes, Brenda interjected. We're prepared to offer you alternative building plans. A nice Spanish colonial-style structure with stucco walls and a tile roof. It would fit much better with the area's aesthetic. I stared at them in disbelief. You're not listening. The judge ordered you to leave me alone. You have no say in what I build. None. And you're violating that order by being here right now. We're not trying to exercise authority, Helen said quickly. We're simply making a neighborly request. Surely we can work something out that satisfies everyone. Mike Torres had noticed the commotion and was walking over. Everything okay, Lucas? These ladies were just leaving, I said firmly. Brenda's pleasant facade cracked. You're making a huge mistake. Do you have any idea how much property value you're going to destroy with that ugly building? We have members who have lived in Copper Ridge for 20 years, who have invested their life savings in their homes, and you're going to tank their equity because you're too stubborn to be reasonable. My property, my choice, I said. And you're trespassing. Please leave, or I'll call the sheriff. You're going to regret this, Brenda hissed. Then she and Helen got back in the Lexus and drove off, kicking up dust and gravel. Mike shook his head. That woman has serious problems. Tell me about it. Listen, I got that whole conversation on video. If she shows up again, I'm filing a police report. Good idea. The foundation pour went perfectly. Within a week, the concrete had cured and Mike's crew started erecting the metal frame. Watching my workshop take shape was incredibly satisfying. Every day I'd drive out and see more progress. The frame went up, then the roof panels, then the walls. But I kept finding little acts of sabotage. First, it was just trash. Bags of garbage dumped at the entrance to my property, forcing me to clean it up before the construction trucks could get through. Then someone knocked over a pallet of roofing panels in the middle of the night, scratching several of them badly enough that they had to be replaced. My trail camera caught a dark sedan driving by slowly several times, but the license plate wasn't visible. Then it got worse. I arrived at the property one morning to find that someone had cut through the lock on my storage container and stolen about $3,000 worth of tools. Milwaukee cordless drills, a compressor, a welding kit I just bought. All gone. I called the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office and filed a report. A deputy came out, took photos, dusted for prints, but I could tell by his expression that he didn't expect to recover anything. You got any idea who might have done this? He asked. I've got a pretty good suspicion, I said, and told him about the HOA situation, about Brenda Morrison, about the court case and the judge's order. The deputy's expression shifted from bored routine to actual interest. You're saying this HOA lady has been harassing you even after a judge told her to stop. That's exactly what I'm saying. You got any proof it was her? No direct proof, but the timing is pretty suspicious. He nodded slowly. I'll add this to the report. Might want to consider getting some better security out here. Cameras, better locks, maybe motion sensor lights. I spent the next day installing 4 high-quality security cameras covering every angle of the property, plus new heavy-duty locks and a serious alarm system for the storage container. The cameras had night vision and were connected to my phone, so I'd get alerts for any motion. 2 nights later, at 2:30 a.m., my phone started buzzing with alerts. I grabbed it and pulled up the camera feed. Someone in dark clothing was walking around my property with a flashlight, looking at the partially completed building. I couldn't make out who it was, but they were definitely up to no good. I dialed 911. "This is 911. What's your emergency?" "I've got someone trespassing on my property. I'm watching them on my security camera right now. They're walking around a construction site." The dispatcher took my information and said a deputy was en route. I stayed on the line, watching the figure on my camera. They walked around the building, checking the doors, then went to my storage container and started messing with the lock. "They're trying to break into my storage container," I told the dispatcher. "Stay where you are, sir. Don't approach them yourself. Deputy is about 5 minutes out." It was the longest 5 minutes of my life. The person on my camera finally gave up on the storage container lock and instead went to the building. They had something in their hand, a spray paint can maybe. Then I saw the flash of red and blue lights on the camera feed. The person froze, then started running toward the desert scrub, but there was nowhere to go. Within 30 seconds, a deputy had them on the ground in handcuffs. "Sir, the subject is in custody," the dispatcher told me. "Deputy will contact you shortly." I threw on clothes and made the 40-minute drive from my rental to the property, breaking probably a few speed limits. When I got there, 2 sheriff's vehicles were parked on the road with their lights still flashing. A deputy met me as I got out of my truck. "Mr. Vance, I'm Deputy Martinez. We've got your trespasser in custody." "Who is it?" White male, approximately 25 years old. "Says his name is Tyler Morrison. Says he was just out for a walk." "Morrison. Any relation to Brenda Morrison?" Deputy Martinez smiled grimly. "Says that's his mother. And we found some interesting items on him. Spray paint, a crowbar, and a container of sugar." "Sugar? For putting in your construction equipment's gas tanks. Would have caused some serious damage." "We're charging him with criminal trespassing, possession of burglary tools, and attempted criminal damage." I looked over at the patrol car where I could see a young man sitting in the back seat, his head down. "His mother put him up to this." "Can't prove that right now, but between you and me, I'd bet money on it. We're going to have a very interesting conversation with Miss Morrison." Tyler Morrison was taken to jail. I spent the next hour giving my statement to Deputy Martinez, showing him the footage from my security cameras, explaining the whole situation with the HOA and his mother. "This is harassment, plain and simple," Deputy Martinez said. "And now it's crossed over into criminal activity. I'm going to talk to my sergeant about this. We might want to pay Miss Morrison a visit." "Please do," I said. "This has been going on for months." I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I sat in my truck watching the sunrise over my property, watching the building that was now probably 70% complete, thinking about how insane this whole situation had become. All I wanted was to build a workshop on my own land, and I'd been dragged into court, harassed by code enforcement, had my tools stolen, and now someone had been arrested trying to sabotage my construction. All because Brenda Morrison couldn't handle not getting her way. The next morning I called Janet Reynolds and filled her in on everything. "This is serious, Lucas," she said. "They're not just being annoying anymore. This is criminal harassment, possibly conspiracy to commit vandalism. You need to document everything, and you might want to consider filing a civil suit." "For what?" "Harassment, intentional infliction of emotional distress, interference with business operations. You've had significant delays and expenses because of their actions. You could recover damages." "I just want them to leave me alone." I understand, but sometimes the only way to make a bully stop is to hit them in the wallet. Let me do some research and I'll send you a proposal. 3 days later, the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office contacted me. Brenda Morrison and Helen Davenport were being charged with conspiracy to commit criminal damage and harassment. Apparently, Tyler Morrison had decided he didn't want to take the fall alone and had provided a detailed statement about how his mother and Helen had asked him to send Mr. Vance a message about building his ugly workshop. The detectives had also recovered text messages between Brenda, Helen, and Tyler discussing ways to delay or sabotage my construction. It was all documented in writing, which made the prosecutors very happy. I was called in to give a formal statement at the sheriff's office. A detective named Sarah Williams took my statement, recording everything while I walked through the entire timeline of harassment, from Brenda's first appearance on my property to Tyler's arrest. This is one of the more excessive HOA situations I've seen, Detective Williams said. And I've seen some doozies. These people really can't stand not having control. It's about more than control, I said. It's about power. Brenda Morrison has probably been running that HOA like her personal fiefdom for years, and the idea that someone might not have to follow her rules just broke her brain. Well, she's going to learn that there are actual rules and laws and consequences. The DA is taking this case seriously. Over the next few weeks, construction continued. Mike and his crew finished the building, installed the electrical system, put in the plumbing for a bathroom and utility sink, and added the overhead garage doors. It was beautiful. Everything I dreamed of and more. Meanwhile, the legal system ground forward. Tyler Morrison took a plea deal, probation, community service, and a substantial fine in exchange for his testimony against his mother and Helen. Brenda and Helen both refused plea deals and insisted they'd done nothing wrong. Their trial was scheduled for August, 4 months after my building was finally completed. I got my certificate of occupancy from the county in July. That same week, I had the 1967 Mustang delivered to my workshop. Seeing it sitting in the middle of that beautiful space, waiting for restoration, was one of the most satisfying moments of my life. I took a photo and posted it on my personal Facebook page with the caption, "Finally working on my dream project in my dream workshop. Built on my land, outside any HOA jurisdiction. Success." It was petty, but I didn't care. The trial was in late August. I was called as a witness for the prosecution. The courtroom was packed with people from Copper Ridge Estates, some supporting Brenda and Helen, others clearly there to enjoy the show. The assistant district attorney, a sharp woman named Lisa Brennan, walked me through my testimony. I explained the timeline, showed the text messages and letters I'd received, described the harassment and the impact it had on my life and my project. "Mr. Vance, can you estimate the financial impact of the defendant's actions?" she asked. "Between legal fees, construction delays, damaged materials, stolen tools, and the costs of installing security systems, I'd estimate around $35,000 in direct costs. That doesn't count my time, stress, or the fact that I had to take unpaid leave from my job." Brenda's lawyer, Patterson, tried to make me look like the unreasonable one during cross-examination. "Isn't it true, Mr. Vance, that you could have avoided all of this by simply submitting your building plans to the HOA for review?" "No," I said firmly. "I couldn't have avoided it because the HOA has no legal authority over my property. Submitting to their review would have been acknowledging authority they don't have. My clients were simply trying to protect their community's property values. Your clients were breaking the law. Multiple laws, actually, as proven by the criminal charges we're all here for. Patterson didn't have much else. The evidence against Brenda and Helen was overwhelming. Text messages, witness testimony from Tyler, security camera footage, records of the frivolous code enforcement complaints, everything. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. Brenda Morrison was sentenced to 6 months in county jail, 3 years probation, a $10,000 fine, and ordered to pay restitution to me. Helen Davenport got 4 months in jail, 3 years probation, and a $7,500 fine. Judge Chen, the same judge who dismissed the original HOA lawsuit, handled the sentencing. She didn't mince words. Miss Morrison, Miss Davenport, what you engaged in was not community protection or property value preservation. It was bullying, harassment, and ultimately criminal behavior. You abused positions of minor authority in an HOA to terrorize a man who had every legal right to build on his own property. You wasted court resources with frivolous lawsuits. You orchestrated a campaign of harassment that involved false complaints to government agencies. And you conspired to commit vandalism and property damage. This behavior is absolutely unacceptable, and I'm sentencing you accordingly. I watched Brenda's face as she was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs. She looked stunned, like she genuinely couldn't believe this was happening to her. Even at the very end, she couldn't grasp that her actions had consequences. After the sentencing, I met with Janet Reynolds one more time to discuss the civil lawsuit. With the criminal convictions, my case was essentially guaranteed to win. I'd estimate you could recover somewhere between $50,000 and $100,000, Janet said. Pain and suffering, emotional distress, legal fees, lost wages, all of it. I thought about it for a long time. Part of me wanted to squeeze every penny out of Brenda Morrison and Helen Davenport. They'd made my life hell for months. They'd cost me money, time, and peace of mind, but another part of me just wanted to be done with the whole mess. What if I just ask for my actual documented expenses? I said. The $35,000 in direct costs plus your fees. Janet looked surprised. You're leaving a lot of money on the table, I know. But I don't want to spend the next year of my life dealing with this. I want to move on, work on my cars, enjoy my property. If they pay my actual costs, that's enough. Your call, Janet said. I'll draw up the papers. The civil case settled out of court. Brenda Morrison's homeowners insurance ended up covering most of it, though she had to pay a significant deductible. I got a check for $42,000, which covered all my expenses and Janet's fees. It was over. The Copper Ridge Estates HOA, meanwhile, was in chaos. Once news of Brenda and Helen's conviction spread, several homeowners started asking questions about how the HOA had been managed. An audit revealed that Brenda had been using HOA funds to pay for personal expenses, including the lawyer fees for the lawsuit against me. She'd basically embezzled tens of thousands of dollars over several years. More charges were filed. Her 6-month sentence turned into 18 months. The HOA was forced to issue a special assessment to cover the missing funds, which made Brenda very unpopular with her former supporters. Helen Davenport resigned from the HOA board while serving her sentence and moved to Oregon to live with her daughter after her release. I heard through the grapevine that she'd become something of a pariah in the community. As for me, I spent the rest of that year working on the Mustang. I pulled the engine, rebuilt it from the ground up, restored the interior, fixed the body work, and repainted it in its original Acapulco blue. It was meticulous work, but every hour I spent in that workshop was therapy. I'd sometimes drive out to the property early in the morning, make coffee in my shop's small kitchen, and just sit there watching the sunrise over the desert. My workshop was exactly half a mile from the Copper Ridge Estate's boundary, just like I'd always known. I could see a few of their houses in the distance, but they were far enough away that they didn't bother me, and they definitely couldn't tell me what to do with my property. In December, I finished the Mustang restoration. It was beautiful, absolutely stunning. I took it to a classic car show in Phoenix and won best in class. The trophy sits on a shelf in my workshop, right next to a framed copy of Judge Chen's dismissal order from that first HOA lawsuit. I eventually did meet some of my actual neighbors, the people who owned property near mine but outside the HOA development. They were good people, fellow refugees from suburban development life. We'd get together sometimes for barbecues and beer, trading stories about the various ways HOAs had made our previous lives miserable. One of them, a retired contractor named Bill who lived a quarter-mile east, told me he'd been approached by Brenda Morrison years ago when he built his house. She tried to tell me I needed HOA approval for my roof color, Bill said, laughing. I told her to take a hike. She threatened to sue but never did. Guess she finally picked on the wrong person when she came after you. I was just stubborn enough not to back down, I said. And you had the money to fight. That's the real problem with these HOA tyrants. Most people can't afford lawyers, so they just give in. You stood up for yourself and for all of us. I hadn't really thought about it that way, but he was right. If I'd backed down, if I'd let Brenda intimidate me into not building my workshop, or into seeking her approval despite having no legal obligation to do so, it would have emboldened her to keep expanding her little empire. Maybe she would have tried to claim authority over Bill's property next, or someone else's. By standing my ground, by fighting back legally and documenting everything, I'd put a stop to her tyranny. Not just for me, but for everyone else she might have targeted in the future. The Copper Ridge Estates, HOA, got new leadership. People who actually understood that their authority ended at their legal boundaries, and that their job was to maintain common areas and enforce reasonable rules within their community, not to control everything they could see from their windows. I heard they were actually becoming a pretty well-run organization, focused on actual community improvement rather than petty power games. I never spoke to Brenda Morrison again. I heard she eventually sold her house in Copper Ridge at a loss and moved to Nevada. I didn't care where she went as long as she stayed away from me and my property. My workshop became everything I'd hoped it would be. After finishing the Mustang, I bought a 1972 Chevelle that needed a complete frame-off restoration. That project took me another year and a half. Then I found a 1955 Chevy Bel Air in rough shape, but with good bones. The work never ended, and I loved every minute of it. I eventually quit my engineering job and started a small business doing custom restoration work. Turns out there are a lot of people in Arizona with classic cars and not enough good restoration shops to handle them all. My workshop, with its professional equipment and careful attention to detail, developed a solid reputation. I hired 2 employees, both young guys who were passionate about cars and wanted to learn the trade. We stayed busy year-round, and I was making about the same money I'd made as an engineer, but with a lot more satisfaction. People would sometimes ask me about the whole HOA situation. The story had made the local news, and in the classic car community, I'd become a bit of a folk hero for standing up to HOA overreach. Would you do it again? Someone asked me at a car show. Knowing what you'd have to go through, would you still buy that property and build that shop? I didn't even have to think about it. Absolutely. That property, that workshop, it's everything I wanted. Yeah, Brenda Morrison made my life hell for a while, but she lost. I won. And now I get to do what I love every day in a place that's entirely mine, with no HOA, no rules, no one to answer to except myself and my customers. That was the whole point, really. Freedom. The freedom to build what I wanted on my own land. The freedom to run my business the way I saw fit. The freedom to live my life without some petty tyrant demanding I submit to their authority. It wasn't about the building or even about defeating Brenda Morrison, though that was satisfying. It was about principle. It was about standing up for property rights and refusing to be bullied. On the 5-year anniversary of finishing my workshop, I threw a big party. I invited all my neighbors, my employees, my customers, Janet Reynolds, even Detective Williams and Deputy Martinez, who'd helped put Brenda and Helen behind bars. We had a massive barbecue in the desert, country music playing from speakers, classic cars parked everywhere, and a beautiful Arizona sunset painting the sky orange and purple. Bill, my neighbor, made a toast to Lucas for having the backbone to stand up to an HOA bully and for building the finest dam workshop in Maricopa County. Everyone cheered and raised their beers. I looked around at all these people, at my workshop standing solid and permanent in the background, at the desert landscape I'd fallen in love with, and felt completely content. The workshop was everything I dreamed it would be. The business was thriving. My life was exactly what I wanted it to be, and I'd never have to deal with an HOA again. Well, almost never. About a month after the anniversary party, I got a letter in the mail from a different HOA about 3 miles north of my property. They'd apparently heard about my situation with Copper Ridge Estates and wanted to proactively reach out to discuss their concerns about commercial vehicle traffic on the county roads near their development. I read the letter, laughed, and tossed it in the trash. Then I called Janet Reynolds. "Janet, I think I might need you again." Another HOA. Another HOA. But this time they're not even pretending I'm in their jurisdiction. They just don't like that my customers drive past their development to get to my shop. Janet sighed. "These people never learn. Send me the letter. I'll draft a response explaining property rights, commercial traffic laws, and the potential consequences of harassing a business owner who's already proven he'll fight back." "Thanks, Janet. Lucas, I'm going to give you a friends and family discount on this one. You've become my best example of what happens when HOAs overreach. I've used your case in 3 presentations to property law conferences. You're famous in real estate attorney circles." "I'm honored," I said, only half sarcastically. Janet's letter apparently did the trick, because I never heard from that HOA again. Word had spread in the local community about what happened to Brenda Morrison and Helen Davenport. No one wanted to be the next HOA president to end up in jail for harassing someone who was clearly outside their jurisdiction. My business continued to grow. I expanded the workshop, adding another 1,200 square feet for additional work bays. This time, the permitting process was smooth and easy. The county inspector who came out to approve the addition actually complimented my work and asked if I'd restore his father's old Thunderbird. I took on the Thunderbird project as a favor, charging him only my cost for parts. It seemed like good karma to help out the guy who'd been so helpful with my permits. Years passed. The Copper Ridge Estates HOA continued to function normally under new leadership. I'd occasionally see people I recognized from the original conflict, former Brenda Morrison supporters who'd probably attended the trial hoping to see me lose. If we made eye contact at the grocery store or gas station, they'd usually look away quickly, embarrassed. I didn't hold grudges. The whole situation had worked out fine for me in the end. Better than fine, actually. The adversity had forced me to really commit to my dream, to fight for it, to prove it was worth fighting for. In a weird way, Brenda Morrison had done me a favor by pushing me to stand my ground. But I never forgot the lessons I learned during those months of harassment and legal battles. I learned that bullies rely on people being too tired, too scared, or too broke to fight back. I learned that documentation is everything in legal disputes. I learned that standing on principle, even when it's expensive and exhausting, is sometimes the only way to win. And I learned that there are a lot of people out there who think that serving on an HOA board gives them power over other people's lives. People who have forgotten that property rights are fundamental to American freedom. People who need to be reminded that their authority has limits and consequences exist for overstepping those limits. My workshop stands as a monument to those lessons. Every time I walk into that building, every time I fire up a welding torch or slide under a classic car on the lift, I remember that this place exists because I refuse to submit to illegitimate authority. The metal walls that Brenda Morrison found so offensive gleam in the Arizona sun. The building that she said would destroy property values houses a thriving business. The workshop she tried so hard to prevent has become an integral part of the local community, training young mechanics, restoring pieces of automotive history, and providing me with a life I absolutely love. Brenda Morrison is somewhere in Nevada, presumably having learned nothing from her experience. Helen Davenport is in Oregon, hopefully making better choices. Tyler Morrison did his community service, and I heard, moved to California to start over somewhere no one knew about his criminal record. And I'm in my workshop, exactly half a mile outside the Copper Ridge Estates, HOA boundaries, living my best life. Sometimes in the evenings when the work is done and my employees have gone home, I'll sit in my office area with a cold beer and look out at the desert. I'll think about that day when Brenda first came marching across the scrubland toward my property, so confident in her authority, so certain she could make me submit. I'll think about the judge dismissing her lawsuit, about the jury convicting her of harassment and conspiracy, about the look on her face when she was sentenced to jail time, and I'll smile, because my workshop is built. My business is successful. My life is free from HOA tyranny. And there's not a damn thing Brenda Morrison or anyone like her can do about it. That's real freedom. That's property rights. That's the American dream built on my own land, funded by my own money, under my own control. And it all started because I had the audacity to build a workshop half a mile outside an HOA's boundaries, and the stubbornness to fight when a Karen named Brenda Morrison insisted I couldn't. Best decision I ever made.